Blood trailed across Sarah's porch as the gravely injured Bobcat collapsed, her pregnant belly heaving with desperate final breaths. Inside, her house cat Oscar did the unthinkable, pawing frantically at the glass with unmistakable recognition, making sounds of urgent familiarity that sent chills down Sarah's spine. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The pounding rain muffled the sound of labored breathing as a desperate figure limped through the darkness. Lightning illuminated the suburban landscape for brief, terrifying seconds, revealing the bobcat's matted fur and the dark stains spreading across her side. Each step was agony, each breath a battle, but the wild creature pressed on, driven by two primal instincts, survival and the protection of the lives she carried within her swollen belly. Sarah Chen's night had started ordinarily enough. The 34-year-old wildlife veterinarian had settled onto her couch with a steaming mug of chamomile tea. Her black and white tuxedo cat Oscar curled contentedly beside her. The storm outside rattled the windows of her modest ranch house, but inside all was peaceful, until Oscar's head suddenly snapped up, his ears swiveling toward the back door like twin radar dishes. "What is it, buddy?" Sarah murmured, reaching to scratch behind his ears. But Oscar was already gone, leaping off the couch and padding silently across the hardwood floor toward the kitchen and the sliding glass door that led to the back porch. Sarah sighed, setting down her tea. Oscar had been a rescue, found abandoned in a cardboard box outside the wildlife center where she worked. 3 years later, he still maintained an uncanny vigilance, as though constantly expecting disaster. "Probably just a raccoon again," Sarah said to herself, following her cat's determined path. But as she rounded the corner into the kitchen, the sight that greeted her stopped her cold. Oscar stood rigid on his hind legs, front paws pressed against the glass door, body tense as a coiled spring. Outside, illuminated by the motion sensor light, lay a bobcat, soaking wet, sides heaving with labored breathing, and a dark puddle forming beneath her that Sarah immediately recognized as blood. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her professional instincts kicking in even as her heart raced. The bobcat's eyes, half closed in pain, still managed to convey a desperate intelligence. This wasn't a random occurrence. Somehow, this wild animal had chosen her doorstep. Oscar let out a sound that Sarah had never heard from him before, not quite a meow, not quite a yowl, but something in between, a communication. And most shocking of all, he wasn't displaying fear. There was no arched back, no puffed tail. Instead, he pawed at the glass, his eyes fixed on the suffering creature outside. Sarah's mind raced through her options. Protocol dictated calling animal control immediately. Wild predators, especially injured ones, were unpredictable and dangerous. But as the bobcat's side heaved with another labored breath, Sarah knew that waiting meant death, for the mother and her unborn kittens. "I must be out of my mind," she muttered, reaching for her emergency kit that she kept in the hall closet. As a wildlife vet, she was trained to handle wild animals, but bringing an apex predator into her home violated every safety guideline she'd ever learned. Oscar hadn't moved from his position, still making that strange sound, still staring at the bobcat with an intensity that seemed almost communicative. When Sarah returned with her medical bag and a thick pair of protective gloves, she was struck by the tableau before her, predator and prey separated by glass yet somehow connected. "Stand back, Oscar," she said firmly, gently moving the cat aside with her foot. Oscar complied but stayed close, his tail swishing with agitation. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. "Please don't make me regret this," she whispered, and slid open the door. The bobcat didn't move, didn't even flinch at the sound. That worried Sarah more than anything. A healthy wild animal should have reacted to the potential threat. Instead, those amber eyes simply tracked her movements with exhausted awareness. Working quickly, Sarah assessed the situation. The bobcat was female, heavily pregnant, with what appeared to be a deep laceration across her flank, likely from a car collision or perhaps barbed wire. The wound was serious but not immediately fatal if properly treated. The greater concern was shock and blood loss. "I need to get you inside," Sarah said softly, speaking in the same calm, low voice she used with all frightened animals. "I'm going to help you and your babies, but you need to trust me." As if understanding, the bobcat's eyes flickered to Oscar, who had positioned himself just inside the doorway, still making that strange sound. Sarah followed her gaze, and for a moment, she could have sworn the two cats were communicating something beyond her human comprehension. Using a thick blanket from her kit, Sarah carefully approached the injured animal. In her experience, wild predators in this condition typically had one of two reactions: aggressive defense or complete submission. She braced for either, but what happened next defied explanation. As Sarah knelt beside the bobcat, Oscar suddenly darted outside, positioning himself near the wildcat's head. Sarah froze, horrified that her pet was about to be injured or worse. But instead of attacking, the bobcat seemed to relax slightly, her eyes fixed on Oscar as he gently touched his nose to her ear, then looked back at Sarah with an almost impatient expression. "Are you helping me?" Sarah whispered incredulously. Taking advantage of the bobcat's unusual calm, Sarah quickly draped the blanket over the injured animal and, with practiced movements, scooped her up. The bobcat was heavy, especially with her pregnant belly, but Sarah managed to lift her and carry her into the house. Oscar trotted alongside, keeping pace and maintaining that strange vocalization. Sarah had converted her spare bedroom into a treatment space for occasional wildlife emergencies, complete with an examination table and basic medical supplies. It wasn't a full clinic, but it would have to do. As she gently placed the bobcat on the table, she was struck again by the animal's unusual behavior. No struggle, no attempt to flee or fight. Just those intelligent eyes, watching, waiting, somehow trusting. "Oscar, you need to leave now," Sarah said firmly, attempting to shoo her cat from the room. But Oscar planted himself in the doorway, sitting down with the determined air of a guardian. After a brief standoff, Sarah relented. "Fine, but stay back. I mean it." For the next 2 hours, Sarah worked methodically to clean and treat the wound, administer fluids, and check the condition of the unborn kittens using a portable ultrasound machine. Throughout it all, the bobcat remained eerily cooperative, as though she understood that Sarah was helping her. And Oscar maintained his vigil, those green eyes never leaving the scene before him. "4 kittens," Sarah murmured, studying the ultrasound screen, "and they look healthy, despite everything you've been through." She gently stroked the bobcat's head, marveling at being allowed such intimate contact with a wild predator. "You're one tough mama." As Sarah administered the last of the antibiotics and began to clean up her supplies, exhaustion finally overtook her. It was nearly 3 in the morning. The storm outside had subsided to a gentle patter, and she had done all she could for now. She had prepared a makeshift recovery space in a large dog crate, lined with soft blankets and equipped with water, but she hesitated to move the bobcat again so soon. "I'll let you rest here for a bit longer," she decided, dimming the lights in the room. "In the morning, I'll figure out next steps." As she turned to leave, she noticed Oscar had finally moved from his position at the door. The tuxedo cat had jumped onto the corner of the examination table and settled himself there, not touching the bobcat but close enough that they could see each other clearly. The bobcat's eyes, heavy with exhaustion and medication, tracked him briefly before closing. Sarah stood in the doorway, witnessing something she couldn't quite explain. A domestic cat keeping watch over an injured wild cousin, a predator allowing itself to be vulnerable in the presence of humans. In her years of wildlife work, She had never seen anything like it. "What do you know that I don't, Oscar?" she whispered. The cat merely blinked at her, then returned his attention to the sleeping bobcat. Sarah shook her head in wonder and quietly pulled the door half closed, leaving just enough space for Oscar to leave if he wanted to. But somehow, she knew he wouldn't. Morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin golden stripes across Sarah's face. She blinked awake with that momentary confusion that follows an interrupted night's sleep, then sat bolt upright as memories flooded back. The bobcat, the emergency treatment, Oscar's bizarre behavior. "Please tell me that was a dream," she muttered, reaching for her phone. 5:47 a.m. She'd managed less than 3 hours of sleep. With a groan, Sarah swung her legs over the side of the bed and padded down the hallway toward the makeshift treatment room, steeling herself for whatever she might find. The door was exactly as she'd left it, partially ajar. Sarah took a deep breath and peered inside. The sight that greeted her was so extraordinary that she had to press a hand against the doorframe to steady herself. The bobcat was awake, alert, and still lying on the examination table. Oscar had moved during the night and was now curled up against the wildcat's back, his black and white fur a stark contrast to her tawny, spotted coat. Most astonishing of all, the bobcat was purring, a deep rumbling sound that filled the small room. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered. At the sound of her voice, both cats turned to look at her. Oscar gave a familiar chirp of greeting, but remained pressed against the bobcat, who regarded Sarah with those intelligent amber eyes, now clearer and more focused than they had been during the night. The wild animal showed no fear, no aggression, only a wary acceptance that defied everything Sarah knew about wildlife behavior. Keeping her movements slow and deliberate, Sarah approached the examination table. "Good morning to both of you," she said softly. "I need to check your wound, Mama." The bobcat remained still as Sarah carefully removed the bandage to examine the injury. To her relief, there was no sign of infection, though the wound was serious enough that it would require several weeks to heal properly. As she worked, Oscar supervised with an almost clinical interest, occasionally touching his nose to the bobcat's ear, as if offering reassurance. "You should be in a wildlife center," Sarah told the bobcat, as she applied fresh antibiotics and a new bandage. "Or better yet, with rangers who specialize in your species. I'm breaking about a dozen regulations keeping you here." The bobcat simply watched her, unblinking. "And you," Sarah said, turning to Oscar, "are defying every natural instinct a house cat should have. She's a predator who could take you out with one swipe." Oscar responded by deliberately closing his eyes and snuggling closer to the wild cat. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from the Wildlife Center director wondering why she hadn't shown up for her morning shift. With everything that had happened, she'd completely forgotten it was a workday. "Family emergency," she texted back. "Need to take a personal day." It wasn't entirely a lie. Whatever was happening here, it felt deeply personal, a strange intersection of her professional life and her private one. And she couldn't possibly leave now, not with a pregnant bobcat in her spare room and her domestic cat playing nurse. After finishing the examination, Sarah prepared a shallow dish of water and another with small pieces of raw chicken from her refrigerator. She placed both within easy reach of the bobcat, who sniffed at the offerings but made no immediate move to eat or drink. "I'm going to convert the crate into something more comfortable for you," Sarah explained, feeling slightly foolish for talking to the wild animal as though she could understand. "You need a safe space for when those babies decide to arrive." As Sarah worked to rearrange the large dog crate, lining it with soft blankets and positioning it in a quiet corner of the room, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary circumstances that had brought this wild creature to her doorstep. Bobcats were notoriously elusive, preferring remote areas far from human habitation, Yet this one had not only approached a human dwelling, but seemed to have deliberately sought help. "How did you know?" Sarah asked softly, glancing back at the bobcat. "How did you know this was a safe place to come?" The bobcat's ears twitched and her gaze shifted briefly to Oscar, who was now grooming himself nonchalantly beside her. Sarah followed the look, a sudden realization dawning on her. "Wait, have you two met before?" She thought back over the past few months, trying to recall any unusual behavior from Oscar. He was an indoor cat, but occasionally he would slip out through the pet door at night, returning before dawn with a self-satisfied air that Sarah had attributed to secret adventures. Could he possibly have been meeting this bobcat somewhere in the neighborhood? The very idea was preposterous. Domestic cats and wild predators didn't form friendships. They certainly didn't bring injured friends home for medical attention. And yet, the evidence was right in front of her. Oscar, completely at ease beside a predator 3 times his size, and the bobcat, allowing his presence with what appeared to be genuine comfort. Sarah's scientific mind rebelled against the fantastical implications, searching for rational explanations. Perhaps the bobcat was someone's escaped exotic pet, already habituated to domestic cats. But the animal showed no signs of previous captivity, no collar marks, no unusual wear on her claws or teeth that might suggest confinement. With the crate prepared, Sarah faced her next challenge, persuading the bobcat to move into it. She approached the examination table cautiously, prepared for resistance. "Okay, Mama, time to get you settled somewhere more comfortable." To her surprise, Oscar leapt down from the table and walked directly to the crate, sniffing around its entrance before looking back expectantly at the bobcat. After a moment's hesitation, the wild cat struggled to her feet, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. Sarah held her breath, ready to intervene if the animal's wound reopened, but the bobcat managed to lower herself carefully from the table. With slow, deliberate steps, she followed Oscar to the crate and, after a brief inspection, entered it willingly. Oscar immediately followed, settling himself beside her once more. Sarah stared in disbelief. Did you just show her where to go?" Oscar blinked lazily in response. Throughout the day, Sarah divided her time between remote work at her laptop and frequent checks on her unusual patients. The bobcat alternated between sleeping and alert observation, occasionally accepting small amounts of water and, by afternoon, nibbling at the raw chicken. Oscar left the crate only for brief visits to his litter box and food bowl, always returning promptly to resume his position beside the wild cat. By evening, Sarah had made several difficult decisions. First, she would keep the bobcat's presence secret for now. If animal control discovered a wild predator in her home, they would remove it immediately, regardless of its condition. Second, she would give the bobcat a name. Luna seemed fitting for the mysterious nighttime visitor. And third, she would need supplies if she was going to support a birth. "I'll be back in an hour," she told Oscar firmly, gathering her keys and purse. "Do not let her out of that crate, understand?" Oscar's steady gaze somehow managed to convey both innocence and mischief simultaneously. At the pet store, Sarah purchased additional blankets, a second large crate, and various supplies that might be needed for newborn kittens. At the butcher shop, she selected fresh meats suitable for a carnivore's diet. Throughout her errands, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled into something far beyond her understanding, some secret world where the boundaries between wild and domestic weren't as fixed as humans believed. When she returned home, the scene in the treatment room was exactly as she had left it. Luna resting comfortably in the crate, Oscar keeping his faithful vigil. But as Sarah set down her shopping bags, she noticed something new. A subtle change in Luna's breathing pattern, a restlessness in her movements. "Oh," Sarah whispered, recognizing the signs immediately. "It's starting, isn't it?" Oscar rose to his feet, his attention now completely focused on Luna. The bobcat's amber eyes found Sarah's, and in that moment, a wordless communication passed between them. A wild creature's vulnerable trust placed in human hands. Sarah set her jaw with determination. "Okay, Luna, let's bring your babies into the world." Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, transforming her treatment room into a makeshift delivery suite. Years of assisting wildlife births had prepared her hands for the work ahead, but nothing had prepared her heart for the extraordinary circumstance of helping a wild bobcat deliver in her spare bedroom, while her house cat served as an unlikely midwife's assistant. "This is definitely not in any veterinary textbook," she muttered, arranging clean towels, antiseptic solution, and a heating pad within easy reach. Luna's labor progressed rapidly. The bobcat's powerful body knew its purpose, contractions rippling visibly across her swollen belly as she positioned herself in the back corner of the crate. Her amber eyes, though clouded with pain, remained alert and watchful, tracking Sarah's every movement. Most remarkable of all was Oscar's behavior. The tuxedo cat had taken up position just outside the crate entrance, his posture suggesting both guard and guide. Occasionally he would enter, gently touch his nose to Luna's, then return to his post, all while maintaining that strange vocalizing, a sound somewhere between a purr and a chirp that Sarah had never heard from him before. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Sarah whispered to Oscar, who merely blinked at her before returning his attention to Luna. As the contractions intensified, Sarah positioned herself where she could intervene if necessary, but she knew that wild animals generally managed birth without assistance. Her role was primarily to monitor for complications and ensure that Luna's existing injury didn't compromise the delivery. The first kitten arrived shortly after midnight, a tiny, wet bundle of spotted fur that Luna immediately began to clean with methodical licks. Sarah held her breath, watching for signs of life, exhaling only when the miniature replica of its mother gave a barely audible mewl. "Good girl, Luna," Sarah encouraged softly. "One down, 3 to go." Oscar edged closer to the crate, his green eyes fixed on the newborn with undisguised fascination. To Sarah's astonishment, Luna shifted slightly, allowing Oscar a better view of her offspring. The domestic cat stretched his neck forward, taking in the scent of the newborn, then settled back, seemingly satisfied. The second and third kittens followed in quick succession, each delivery smoother than the last. Luna worked tirelessly, cleaning each kitten and guiding them toward her milk-swollen belly, while simultaneously preparing for the final birth. Sarah marveled at the bobcat's instinctive competence. Despite her injury, despite being in a strange environment, her focus on her newborns was absolute. When the fourth kitten emerged, however, Sarah immediately saw that something was wrong. Unlike its siblings, this last one lay motionless, its tiny form still encased in the birth sac. "Luna, you need to clean this one quickly," Sarah urged, knowing that the mother's licking was crucial to stimulate breathing. But Luna was exhausted, her attention divided between the 3 kittens already nursing and the contractions still rippling through her body. Before Sarah could decide whether to intervene, Oscar acted with startling decisiveness. The domestic cat entered the crate fully, gently nudged Luna's face, then moved to the unmoving kitten. With delicate precision, he began to lick the birth sac away from the newborn's face. Sarah watched in disbelief as her house cat performed the life-saving task with the efficiency of an experienced mother. "Oscar, what on earth?" The tiny kitten twitched, then let out a feeble cry as Oscar's rough tongue stimulated its breathing. Only when the newborn was clearly alive did Oscar step back, allowing Luna to take over. The bobcat gave Oscar a long look that Sarah could only interpret as gratitude before gathering her smallest offspring close. "You're full of surprises tonight," Sarah told Oscar, who had retreated to his position at the crate entrance, grooming his paws as though what he'd done was entirely ordinary. By dawn, the 4 bobcat kittens, 3 females and 1 male, the runt Oscar had saved, were nursing contentedly. Luna, despite her ordeal, remained alert, her eyes occasionally meeting Sarah's with what seemed like conscious acknowledgement. The wild animal's trust was a gift Sarah never expected to receive, a privilege that humbled her. After ensuring that Luna and her kittens were stable, Sarah finally allowed herself to collapse onto the small futon she kept in the room for overnight wildlife monitoring. Oscar immediately joined her, his warm body curling against her side. "You have a lot of explaining to do," she told him sleepily, stroking his soft fur. "But it can wait until we've both had some rest." The next few days established a routine unlike anything Sarah could have imagined. She took an emergency week of personal leave from the Wildlife Center, citing a family crisis, which in an odd way was exactly what she was managing. Luna and her kittens became the center of Sarah's world, their needs dictating her schedule with the demanding precision of any newborns. Oscar, meanwhile, elevated his strange behavior to new heights. He appointed himself co-parent, spending hours beside the crate, watching over the kittens when Luna needed to eat or use the makeshift litter box Sarah had provided. Most incredible of all, Luna allowed this arrangement, seeming to accept Oscar as a trusted ally in the vulnerable early days of her offspring's lives. "This defies everything I know about animal behavior," Sarah told her colleague May during a phone call, careful to keep the details of her family emergency vague. "Territorial predators don't collaborate like this, especially across species." "Nature always has exceptions," May replied. "That's what makes our work interesting. When are you coming back?" Sarah glanced at the crate where Luna was nursing her kittens, Oscar standing sentinel nearby. "Soon. This situation is delicate." By the end of the week, Sarah faced a growing dilemma. Luna's wound was healing well, and the kittens were thriving, their eyes still closed but their tiny bodies gaining strength daily. According to all wildlife rehabilitation protocols, Sarah should transfer them to a proper facility with outdoor enclosures, where Luna could recover fully before they were all released back into the wild. But each time Sarah considered making the call, something stopped her. Partly it was concern about separating Luna from Oscar, whose bond with the wild cat had only deepened since the birth. Partly it was fear that others wouldn't understand the unusual situation and might mishandle it. And partly, though she barely admitted this to herself, it was a selfish desire to witness this extraordinary relationship for as long as possible. The decision was postponed when a storm similar to the one that had brought Luna to her doorstep swept through the area. As thunder shook the house and rain lashed against the windows, Sarah noticed the bobcat growing increasingly agitated, pacing the limited space of her crate despite her healing wound. "What's wrong, Luna?" Sarah asked, approaching cautiously. The bobcat's attention was fixed on something beyond the walls of the house, her ears swiveling toward sounds only she could detect. Oscar, too, seemed unusually alert, his tail twitching with nervous energy. A loud crack of thunder made Sarah jump, but Luna's reaction was far more dramatic. The bobcat rose to her feet, gathering her smallest kitten in her mouth. With unmistakable urgency, she looked directly at Sarah, then at the 3 remaining kittens, her intention clear even across the species barrier. "You want me to help you move them," Sarah realized aloud. "But where?" Luna's gaze shifted toward the window, toward the storm raging outside. Oscar suddenly leapt onto the windowsill, pawing at the glass and making the same strange sound Sarah had heard that first night. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as understanding dawned. "You're worried about something out there, something coming." Acting on instinct rather than reason, Sarah gathered the 3 remaining kittens in a soft blanket. Luna, still carrying the runt, allowed Sarah to guide her from the crate into the main part of the house. Oscar led the way, moving with purpose toward Sarah's bedroom closet, a small, dark space lined with shoes and hanging clothes. "This is where you want to hide," Sarah asked incredulously, but Luna was already entering the closet, placing her kitten in the far corner behind a pile of sweaters. Sarah carefully added the other 3 to the makeshift nest, watching as Luna arranged them with gentle nudges. Oscar positioned himself at the closet entrance, his entire body tense with anticipation. Sarah backed away, leaving the door partially open, and moved to the window. The storm was intensifying, the rain coming down in sheets that made visibility nearly impossible. Yet through the downpour, she thought she caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of her property, something large, moving with determined purpose through the underbrush. "What are you seeing that I'm not?" she whispered to herself, pressing her face closer to the glass. Another flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and for a split second Sarah saw them. 3 coyotes advancing steadily toward her house, their gaunt forms suggesting the desperate hunger of predators driven to unusual hunting grounds by the storm. Sarah's blood ran cold. Somehow Luna had known they were coming. Sarah's veterinary training had taught her to remain calm in emergencies, but the sight of 3 coyotes stalking through her yard sent a spike of primal fear through her system. These weren't just any predators. They were desperate, storm-driven hunters that had tracked Luna's scent to Sarah's doorstep. "They're after you and your babies," Sarah whispered, backing away from the window. Luna and Oscar had already sensed the danger, retreating deep into the closet's protective darkness. The bobcat was curled protectively around her kittens, her amber eyes reflecting what little light filtered in, while Oscar had positioned himself at the entrance like a sentry. A sudden, loud scratching at the back door made Sarah jump. The coyotes were more brazen than she'd expected, driven by hunger to approach a human dwelling. She moved quickly through the house, checking that all doors and windows were securely locked. As she passed the closet, Oscar emerged momentarily, following her with anxious eyes. "Stay with them," Sarah instructed, surprised by how naturally she spoke to him as a partner in this crisis. "I'll handle our unwelcome visitors." The scratching intensified, accompanied now by low growls. Sarah reached for her phone, hesitated, then put it down again. Calling animal control would mean explaining why coyotes were so determined to break into her house, which would inevitably lead to the discovery of Luna and her kittens. Instead, she grabbed a heavy flashlight and the air horn she kept for hiking in bear country. Moving to the back door, she took a deep breath, then flipped on the exterior floodlights and triggered the air horn in 3 sharp blasts. The harsh sound cut through the storm's rumble, and through the door's window, Sarah saw the coyotes scatter momentarily, startled by the sudden noise and light. But they didn't retreat far, their hunger clearly overriding their caution. The largest of the 3, a gaunt male with a battle-scarred face, began circling back almost immediately, testing the perimeter of the house. "You're not giving up easily, are you?" Sarah muttered, watching their movements. A new sound drew her attention, a car pulling into her driveway, headlights cutting through the rain. For a moment, panic seized her. Had someone from animal control somehow discovered Luna's presence? But as the driver's door opened, she recognized the tall figure hurrying toward her porch, rain jacket pulled tight against the downpour. "Mike," she said aloud, unlocking the front door as her neighbor approached. Mike Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was a retired park ranger who lived a quarter-mile down the road. At 62, he still moved with the purposeful stride of someone comfortable in wilderness emergencies. "Sarah," he called above the storm as she opened the door. "You okay? Saw your lights and thought I'd check in. Power's out all over the county." Sarah hadn't even noticed that her own power was still functioning, a lucky break given her current guests. "I'm fine, but I've got coyotes trying to break in around back." Mike's expression shifted instantly to professional concern. "How many?" "3. They seemed desperate, not scared off by noise or lights." Mike nodded grimly. They're struggling this season. Droughts pushed their prey into new territories. Then this storm. He peered past her into the house. Got something they want inside? Sarah hesitated, torn between the need for help and the risk of exposing Luna's presence. But something in Mike's weathered face, the same compassion she'd seen during his occasional visits to the wildlife center, made the decision for her. "You better come see for yourself," she said, stepping back to let him in. As Mike followed her through the house, shaking rain from his jacket, Sarah tried to formulate an explanation that wouldn't sound completely implausible. But when they reached the bedroom and she gestured toward the closet, words failed her. Mike approached cautiously, then froze as he caught sight of what waited inside. "Sweet mother of," he whispered. Luna was fully alert now, her body tensed protectively around her kittens. Oscar remained at his post, but his posture had changed, becoming less defensive as he recognized Sarah's return with a familiar human. "Is that a bobcat?" Mike asked, his voice hushed with disbelief. "With kittens?" Sarah nodded. "Her name is Luna. She showed up on my porch during the last storm, badly injured and pregnant. I've been caring for her ever since." "And those coyotes tracked her here," Mike concluded, his ranger's mind quickly assembling the pieces. "Bobcat with newborns would be quite a find for hungry predators." He squinted at Oscar. "Your cat doesn't seem bothered by the wild one." "That's the strangest part," Sarah admitted. "Oscar's been helping her, almost like they know each other." Before Mike could respond, a loud crash from the back of the house galvanized them both into action. "They've broken through the screen on your porch," Mike said, already moving toward the sound. "Got something we can use to drive them off?" "Air horn flashlight," Sarah said, following close behind. "And there's a shotgun in the hall closet, my dad's. I've never fired it." "Let's hope we don't need to," Mike replied grimly. The coyotes had indeed torn through the screen door and were now prowling the enclosed back porch, sniffing determinedly at the glass sliding door that led into the kitchen. The scarred leader raised his head as Sarah and Mike appeared, hunger momentarily overridden by wariness of the two humans. Mike took the air horn from Sarah and blasted it directly at the glass door, while simultaneously flashing the powerful beam of the flashlight into the coyotes' eyes. The animals retreated slightly, but remained on the porch, their desperation evident in their refusal to flee. "They're not giving up," Mike observed. "Must be starving." Sarah's mind raced. These were wild animals following their instincts, trying to survive a harsh season. Under normal circumstances, she would feel compassion for their plight. But Luna and her vulnerable kittens changed the equation entirely. "I have some meat in the refrigerator," she said suddenly, "from when I was feeding Luna." Mike nodded in understanding. "Might work. Create a diversion, lead them away." As Sarah hurried to the kitchen, a new sound reached her, the distinctive hiss of an angry feline, but much deeper and more threatening than anything a house cat could produce. She turned to see Luna emerging from the bedroom, her movement stiff but determined, Oscar close at her heels. "Luna, no!" Sarah called out, but the bobcat ignored her, advancing toward the glass door where the coyotes continued their efforts to find a way in. When Luna reached the door, she drew herself up to her full height, impressive despite her recent injury and birth, and let out a sound that seemed to vibrate through the entire house. It wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. Behind the glass, the coyotes froze, their predatory focus suddenly diverted by the appearance of an adult bobcat. "She's protecting her territory," Mike whispered, backing slowly away. "And her kittens." Luna maintained her threatening posture, hissing and snarling at the coyotes, who began to show signs of uncertainty. The leader tested the boundary once more, pawing at the glass, but Luna's response was immediate and fierce, a display of maternal fury that transcended her physical condition. To Sarah's astonishment, Oscar moved to Luna's side, his much smaller form nevertheless adding to the defensive line. The domestic cat's fur was fully puffed, his tail like a bottle brush, as he joined Luna in facing down the intruders. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, until a new development changed the dynamics completely. Outside, the storm-darkened sky was suddenly illuminated by flashing red and blue lights. A sheriff's department vehicle had pulled up beside Mike's car. "Must have spotted my truck and stopped to check," Mike said. "Perfect timing." The arrival of the patrol car, with its human occupant now emerging into the rain, was finally enough to overcome the coyotes' desperate hunger. With a last frustrated glance at the prey now denied to them, the three predators slipped off the porch and vanished into the storm-swept darkness. Sarah exhaled shakily, the tension of the confrontation leaving her body in a rush. Luna remained vigilant for several moments longer, then gradually relaxed her threatening posture. She turned to Oscar, touching her nose briefly to his in what looked remarkably like gratitude, before limping back toward the bedroom and her kittens. "I've never seen anything like that," Mike said, his voice filled with wonder. "A house cat and a bobcat working together." Sarah nodded, watching as Oscar hesitated, looking between her and the retreating Luna, before deciding to follow the bobcat. "I don't understand it either, but I'm starting to think there's more to their story than I know." Outside, the sheriff's deputy was approaching the porch, flashlight in hand. Sarah and Mike exchanged a quick glance of shared concern. "I'll handle this," Mike offered, moving toward the door. "Deputy Jenkins is an old fishing buddy. I'll tell him I called you about coyotes near your chicken coop." "I don't have chickens," Sarah pointed out. Mike winked. "He doesn't know that." As Mike stepped outside to intercept the deputy, Sarah hurried back to check on Luna and her kittens. She found the bobcat already settled in the closet again, meticulously checking each kitten as if to ensure they hadn't been harmed during her brief absence. Oscar sat nearby, his grooming routine resumed as though nothing unusual had occurred. "You two are quite the team," Sarah told them, kneeling at the closet entrance. "But you're going to get me in a lot of trouble." Luna's amber eyes met hers, and Sarah was struck again by the intelligence they contained, a wild wisdom that seemed to reach across the divide between their species. The bobcat blinked slowly, then returned her attention to her kittens. Sarah recognized that slow blink. It was how cats showed trust and affection. Somehow, in the midst of danger and chaos, a strange new family was forming under her roof. In the days following the coyote incident, Sarah's home settled into a strange new normal. Mike had successfully diverted the deputy's attention that night, explaining away the commotion as an attempted coyote attack on non-existent chickens. But the close call had left Sarah acutely aware of how precarious their situation was. "I'm harboring a wild predator in her offspring," she told Oscar as she prepared her morning coffee. The tuxedo cat watched her from the counter, his tail flicking occasionally as though considering her words. "That's at least 3 different wildlife regulations I'm breaking." Oscar merely blinked, then jumped down to lead the way to the bedroom where Luna and her kittens remained nestled in the closet. The bobcat had refused to return to the crate after the coyote encounter, apparently preferring the more concealed location for her vulnerable family. Sarah knelt at the closet entrance, keeping a respectful distance as she conducted her daily visual assessment. Luna's wound was healing nicely, the stitches holding firm despite her exertion during the confrontation. The kittens, still blind and helpless at just over a week old, squirmed against their mother's belly, their tiny spotted bodies growing stronger each day. "Another week and they'll start opening their eyes," Sarah murmured, making notes in the journal she'd begun keeping. Recording Luna's recovery and the kitten's development felt important, not just as a veterinary case study, but as documentation of something extraordinary. The phone rang, startling Sarah from her observations. It was May from the Wildlife Center, and the conversation quickly took an uncomfortable turn. "Your family emergency seems to be dragging on," May noted, concern evident in her voice. "The director's asking questions. We're short-staffed and 3 injured hawks came in yesterday." Sarah pressed her fingers against her temple, guilt competing with her determination to protect Luna. "I know. I'm sorry. It's just complicated. Family stuff. Sarah, we've been friends for 4 years. I know you don't have family nearby. What's really going on?" The directness of the question caught Sarah off guard. I can't explain right now. Please just trust me. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't important." The silence that followed was heavy with suspicion. "You know you can tell me anything, right? I'm worried about you." After promising to return to work soon and evading further questions, Sarah ended the call with a growing sense of unease. She couldn't maintain this secret indefinitely. Sooner or later, she would have to make decisions about Luna's future. That afternoon, Mike stopped by with supplies, more raw meat for Luna and unexpectedly a small bag of specialized formula. "Wildlife rehabilitation mix," he explained, setting it on the kitchen counter, "in case any of the kittens need supplemental feeding. I called in a favor from a friend at Yellowstone. Kept it vague, don't worry." Sarah accepted the gift gratefully. "I can't thank you enough for helping, for understanding." Mike's weathered face creased in a smile. 30 years as a ranger, I've seen just about everything in nature. But what's happening with your cats?" He shook his head in wonder. "That's something special." As they spoke, Oscar appeared in the kitchen doorway, meowing insistently. His behavior had changed subtly since the coyote incident. More vigilant, more communicative, as though his role in their unusual household had been elevated by the crisis. "I think he wants us to follow," Sarah said, recognizing the particular tone Oscar used when trying to get her attention. They followed the tuxedo cat to the bedroom, where an unexpected scene greeted them. Luna was no longer in the closet. The bobcat had somehow managed to drag one of the blankets out to the center of the room, creating a new nest where she now lay with her kittens in full view. "She's moved them into the open," Mike observed quietly. "That's significant." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. Wild mothers kept their young hidden, protected from potential threats. Luna's decision to relocate her family to a more visible location suggested a fundamental shift in her perception of safety and her trust in the humans around her. "May I?" Mike gestured toward the bobcat. "Your call," Sarah replied. "She seems to make her own decisions about who she trusts." Mike approached slowly, crouching several feet away. Luna watched him calmly, her amber eyes assessing but not fearful. When Oscar walked over and deliberately sat beside Mike, the bobcat seemed to relax further, accepting his presence by association. "Remarkable," Mike whispered. "In all my years working with wildlife, I've never seen behavior like this." He glanced at Oscar. "Your cat is the key somehow. There's a connection there that goes beyond normal animal interactions." Sarah had been thinking the same thing for days. "I've been going back through my records trying to figure out how they might know each other. Oscar was a rescue, found abandoned outside the Wildlife Center 3 years ago." Mike's eyebrows rose. Luna would have been fully grown by then. Adult female bobcats are fiercely territorial and solitary, except during mating season. "Exactly. It doesn't make sense that they would have formed a friendship in the wild." Sarah hesitated, then added, Unless what? Unless they knew each other before Oscar came to me, before he was abandoned." The implications hung in the air between them. Had Oscar been someone's illegal exotic pet companion, raised alongside a captive bobcat? Had they both escaped or been released from the same situation, The possibilities were troubling, suggesting human irresponsibility that had preceded Sarah's own well-intentioned but unauthorized wildlife rehabilitation. Their speculation was interrupted by a small sound from the blanket nest, a tiny mule. Different from the nursing noises Sarah had grown accustomed to hearing, Luna shifted, revealing the source, the runt of the litter. The male kitten that Oscar had helped save during birth was squirming more actively than his siblings. "Sarah," Mike said softly, pointing. "Look." The kitten's eyes, sealed shut since birth, were beginning to open, tiny slits revealing glimpses of blue that would eventually turn to amber. It was happening several days earlier than Sarah had expected. "He's advancing faster than the others," she noted with surprise. Luna nudged the precocious kitten gently, then looked directly at Oscar, who immediately approached. To Sarah and Mike's astonishment, the bobcat carefully picked up her son by the scruff and placed him in front of Oscar, as if presenting the kitten to the domestic cat. Oscar sniffed the tiny bobcat carefully, then began to groom him with gentle licks, just as he had done during the birth. The kitten responded with wobbly movements, instinctively pushing against Oscar's fur. "She's sharing parenting with him," Sarah whispered, unable to fully process what she was witnessing. "She's treating Oscar like he's the father." Mike shook his head in amazement. "There's got to be more to their history than we understand. This isn't random behavior." Later that evening, after Mike had gone and Luna had returned her adventurous son to the nest with his sisters, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. The mystery of Oscar and Luna's connection nagged at her, demanding investigation. She dug out Oscar's adoption paperwork, reviewing the sparse details. Found in a cardboard box outside the Wildlife Center, approximately 8 weeks old, no collar or microchip. Nothing to indicate where he had come from or who had abandoned him. On impulse, Sarah opened her laptop and began searching through the center's records from that time period, looking for any bobcat admissions or reports. There was nothing about Luna specifically, but she did find several mentions of increased bobcat sightings in residential areas that season, attributed to drought conditions pushing wildlife closer to human settlements. Then, buried in a local news archive from the same month, a small article caught her attention. "Police raid suspected wildlife trafficking operation." The story described a raid on a remote property where authorities had found evidence of exotic animal trading, though most of the animals had apparently been moved before police arrived. Among the items confiscated were shipping crates labeled for various species, including bobcats. Sarah's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. Could Oscar and Luna have been part of the same trafficking operation? Had they formed their unusual bond in captivity, only to be separated when the operation was discovered? It would explain both Oscar's comfort with the wild predator and Luna's willingness to seek out a human home when in distress. The bobcat might have associated the scent of a domestic cat with safety, following Oscar's trail to Sarah's door. As theories swirled in her mind, Sarah glanced toward the bedroom where her unlikely guests were sleeping. Whatever their past, their present was now intertwined in her home, creating a situation both wonderful and increasingly complicated. The kitten's eyes were opening. Soon they would begin exploring, developing the skills they would need in the wild. Sarah had to face the question she'd been avoiding. Was she helping these wild animals, or was her intervention, however well-intentioned, ultimately harming their chances for a natural life? The answer wasn't simple, and as she finally drifted towards sleep, Sarah knew that time was running out for her to decide what came next for Luna, her kittens, and the mysterious bond they shared with Oscar. 2 weeks after Luna's arrival, Sarah's bedroom had transformed into a wilderness nursery. The bobcat kittens, their eyes now fully open and revealing the striking blue that would eventually mature to amber, had begun their first tentative explorations beyond the nest. Their tiny spotted bodies wobbled on unsteady legs as they ventured across the carpet, each excursion growing bolder than the last. Luna watched their adventures with the vigilant attention of any mother, occasionally retrieving a particularly adventurous kitten who strayed too far. Her wound had healed remarkably well, only a thin line of pink scar tissue visible beneath her fur. She moved with increasing confidence, her natural strength returning, a development that both encouraged and concerned Sarah. "A healthy bobcat won't stay voluntarily for long," she told Mike as they observed the family from the doorway. "Especially with growing kittens to provide for." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "She's getting that look in her eyes. The call of the wild." The changes weren't limited to Luna. Oscar had fully embraced his unexpected role as co-parent, spending hours entertaining the kittens with his tail or demonstrating essential cat skills like pouncing and stalking. Most surprisingly, he focused particular attention on the runt, the precocious male who had been first to open his eyes and was now first to attempt climbing onto the bed. "We need to name him," Sarah decided, watching the small male bobcat determinedly scale the bedspread, using his tiny claws to pull himself upward. All of them, actually. "Naming wild animals isn't generally recommended," Mike reminded her gently. "Makes it harder to release them when the time comes." Sarah sighed, knowing he was right but feeling the emotional connection deepen with each passing day. "Just the boy then, since he's so special." They settled on Scout for the adventurous male kitten, whose determination to explore seemed boundless compared to his more cautious sisters. The name fit his pioneering spirit and acknowledged the reality that he and his family would eventually scout their way back to the wilderness where they belonged. That afternoon, Sarah's makeshift research into the wildlife trafficking connection yielded a promising lead. She discovered that Jason Reynolds, the man arrested in the raid 3 years ago, had been released from prison just 6 months earlier after serving time for illegal wildlife trading. "Look at this," she told Mike, showing him the Department of Corrections record on her laptop. Reynolds specialized in breeding exotic cats for private collectors. The records mention bobcats specifically. Mike studied the information with a ranger's practiced eye. Says here his property was about 30 miles north of town, remote location, perfect for an illegal operation. And 3 years ago is exactly when Oscar was found abandoned at the Wildlife Center, Sarah added, excitement building as the puzzle pieces aligned. What if Oscar was being raised alongside bobcat kittens as part of the operation? When the police raided the place, Reynolds might have fled with the valuable adults but abandoned the younger animals, including a domestic kitten that had bonded with the bobcats, Mike concluded. It would explain Oscar's unusual behavior. He was socialized with wildcats from his own kittenhood. The theory made sense, but it raised a disturbing possibility. If Luna was part of that operation, she might have been born in captivity herself. That would explain her unusual comfort around humans and domestic settings. Mike's expression grew serious. If she's imprinted on humans or never learned proper survival skills, releasing her could be disastrous. The implications hung heavily between them. A bobcat raised in captivity, even partially, would face significant challenges in the wild. Without proper hunting skills or territory awareness, Luna and her kittens might not survive if simply released back into nature. "I need to know for sure," Sarah said firmly. "If they came from this trafficking operation, their rehabilitation needs would be completely different from wild-born bobcats. How do you propose finding out? It's not like Luna can tell us her life story." Sarah hesitated, then made a decision she'd been avoiding. "I need to talk to Dr. Abernathy at the Wildlife Center. She has the expertise to assess whether Luna shows signs of captive raising." "That means revealing what you've been hiding," Mike pointed out. "You could lose your job." "I know," Sarah admitted, but I can't make the right decisions for Luna and her kittens without all the information. Their lives matter more than my career." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the bedroom, the sound of something falling, followed by Oscar's startled meow. They rushed to investigate and found Scout perched triumphantly atop the dresser, having knocked over a framed photograph in his climb. Luna was attempting to reach him, front paws stretched up the furniture but unable to climb with her still healing body. "You little troublemaker," Sarah laughed, carefully retrieving the adventurous kitten and returning him to his mother. Luna accepted the help with a gentle headbutt against Sarah's hand, a gesture of thanks that felt almost domestic in its familiarity. That night, after making the difficult decision to call Dr. Abernathy the next day, Sarah found herself unable to sleep again. She wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water, only to find Oscar sitting alertly on the counter, staring out the window. "What is it, buddy?" she asked, joining him at the glass. In the pale moonlight, she could just make out a figure at the edge of her property, a human shape moving with furtive purpose along the tree line. Sarah's first thought was that the coyotes had returned, but this was clearly a person, and they seemed to be studying her house with deliberate interest. Heart pounding, she switched off the kitchen light to better see without being seen. The figure retreated deeper into the shadows, but not before Sarah caught a glimpse of their face in the moonlight. A man, probably in his 40s, with a distinctive scar across his cheek. The description tickled something in her memory. She returned to her laptop, pulling up the article about the wildlife trafficking raid, scanning for details about Jason Reynolds. There it was, in the suspect description. Identified by the distinctive scar on his right cheek, the result of an animal attack according to police reports. Sarah's blood ran cold. Reynolds, the trafficker who might have once owned Luna and Oscar, was out of prison and apparently watching her house. She immediately called Mike, who answered groggily, but snapped to alertness as she explained what she'd seen. "Lock all your doors and windows," he instructed. "I'm calling my contact at the sheriff's department and heading over. Don't confront him if he returns." After securing the house, Sarah checked on Luna and her kittens. The Bobcat was alert. Her ears pricked forward in the way that had previously signaled danger. She knew something was wrong. "It's okay," Sarah assured her, though her own voice trembled slightly. "We'll protect you." The next hour passed in tense vigilance as Sarah periodically checked windows while staying away from direct sight lines. Oscar remained unusually active, patrolling from window to window as though standing guard. When Mike finally arrived with Deputy Jenkins, the same officer who had inadvertently scared off the coyotes, they searched the property thoroughly, but found no one. There were definitely footprints by the tree line, Jenkins confirmed, returning to the house. Recent ones. Someone was watching the place. "I need to know if you're in any danger," the deputy continued, fixing Sarah with a direct look. "Is there something going on here I should know about?" Sarah glanced at Mike, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than she'd planned. "Actually," she began carefully, "there is something I need to show you, but I need your word that you'll hear me out completely before taking any official action." Jenkins's expression was skeptical but professional. "I'll listen, but I can't promise to ignore laws being broken." Sarah led them both to the bedroom, where Luna had gathered her kittens close, clearly sensing the tension. The Bobcat watched the newcomer warily but didn't retreat. "Good Lord," Jenkins breathed, instinctively reaching toward his sidearm before stopping himself. "That's a Bobcat, in your bedroom." "Her name is Luna," Sarah explained, quickly recounting the story of the injured pregnant Bobcat's arrival and the remarkable behavior of Oscar. As she spoke, the tuxedo cat deliberately walked over to Luna's side, emphasizing their unusual bond. "I believe they were both victims of Jason Reynolds' wildlife trafficking operation," Sarah concluded. "And I think he might have discovered they're here." Jenkins removed his hat, running a hand through his gray hair as he processed the extraordinary situation. "This is way above my pay grade," he muttered. "But if Reynolds is involved, that changes things. We've been monitoring his activities since his release, suspected he might return to his old business." "So you believe me?" Sarah asked. "About Reynolds?" "Possibly. About this?" He gestured to the Bobcat family. "Seeing is believing, but it doesn't change the fact that keeping a protected predator species without proper permits is illegal, regardless of your intentions." Mike stepped forward. "What if we made this official, brought in the wildlife authorities, documented everything properly?" Sarah tensed, but Jenkins was already nodding. "That might be the only way to protect both these animals and yourself, ma'am. Especially if Reynolds has taken an interest in your property." As they discussed options, Scout suddenly escaped Luna's watchful eye and made a wobbly approach toward Jenkins, his tiny spotted form fearlessly investigating the stranger's boots. The deputy's stern expression softened as he watched the Bobcat kitten's curious exploration. "Well, aren't you a brave little fellow?" he murmured. In that small moment of connection, Sarah saw her path forward begin to take shape. Morning brought a flurry of activity to Sarah's previously quiet home. Deputy Jenkins had made several calls the night before, setting in motion a carefully negotiated plan. Dr. Eleanor Abernathy, the Wildlife Center's director and head veterinarian, would arrive to assess Luna and her kittens, while a plainclothes officer would monitor the property for any sign of Reynolds returning. "I still can't believe you kept this secret for nearly 3 weeks," May said, helping Sarah prepare the living room for Dr. Abernathy's arrival. After Jenkins had left, Sarah had finally called her colleague, confessing everything and asking for support. "I didn't know what else to do," Sarah admitted. She was injured, pregnant, and somehow knew Oscar. Everything about the situation was extraordinary. May shook her head in amazement. "You could have trusted me, you know, though I probably would have thought you were hallucinating if you'd just told me over the phone." The doorbell rang, announcing Dr. Abernathy's arrival. At 67, Eleanor Abernathy remained an imposing figure in wildlife medicine, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her expression suggesting she had already made up her mind about the situation before seeing it firsthand. "Sarah," she greeted coolly, "Deputy Jenkins has briefed me on the basics, but I'll need to see everything for myself before determining next steps." Sarah nodded, leading her mentor toward the bedroom. "I understand this isn't protocol, Dr. Abernathy, but once you see Luna and Oscar together, I think you'll understand why I made the choices I did." Dr. Abernathy's stern expression didn't waver as they entered the room, but when she caught sight of Luna and her kittens, with Oscar seated protectively nearby, she froze, her clinical detachment momentarily shattered by genuine surprise. "Extraordinary," she whispered, immediately shifting into professional assessment mode. She observed from a distance first, noting the interactions between the domestic and wild cats, the behavior of the kittens, and Luna's overall condition. "The wound healing is excellent," she commented, gradually moving closer. "And the kittens appear well-nourished and developmentally on target." She turned to Sarah with newfound respect in her eyes. "Your care has been exemplary under the circumstances." "Thank you," Sarah replied, relief washing through her. "But I'm more concerned about their background. I believe Luna may have been raised in captivity, part of the Reynolds trafficking operation." Dr. Abernathy nodded thoughtfully. "That would explain a great deal. May I?" She gestured toward Luna, indicating her desire for a closer examination. To everyone's surprise, Luna permitted Dr. Abernathy to approach, maintaining a watchful but non-aggressive posture as the veteran veterinarian conducted a careful visual inspection. "Several telltale signs here," Dr. Abernathy announced after a few minutes. The wear pattern on her canines suggests she was fed processed food rather than hunting natural prey during crucial developmental periods. Her comfort with direct eye contact is unusual for a wild-born bobcat. And this, she pointed to a barely visible mark behind Luna's ear, appears to be scarring from a microchip or tagging system that was removed. So she was definitely captive-raised? Sarah asked. Almost certainly, at least during her formative months, which complicates matters considerably. Dr. Abernathy straightened up. Bobcats with her history often lack the skills necessary for successful rewilding. Add in the fact that her kittens are being raised in a domestic environment with a house cat as a primary social model. The implications hung in the air. Luna and her offspring might never be suitable candidates for release into the wild. What options does that leave? Mike asked, having joined them after speaking with the surveillance officer outside. Dr. Abernathy sighed. Normally, permanent captivity in a wildlife education facility. But even that is complicated by her unusual socialization with a domestic cat. Few facilities would know how to manage this situation. As the adults discussed possibilities, Scout once again demonstrated his adventurous spirit, wobbling determinedly toward Oscar, who had moved to the doorway. The domestic cat greeted the kitten with a gentle headbutt, then began grooming him, eliciting a tiny purr from the spotted baby. "Look at that," May whispered, pointing to the interaction. "It's like they're having a father-son moment." Dr. Abernathy observed the behavior with professional interest. The male kitten has imprinted on the domestic cat as a parental figure. That's going to further complicate his rehabilitation potential. The conversation was interrupted by Mike's phone ringing. He stepped out to answer it, returning moments later with a grim expression. That was Deputy Jenkins. They've spotted Reynolds parked about a quarter-mile down the road, watching the house with binoculars. The atmosphere in the room instantly tensed. Dr. Abernathy's expression hardened. "I know Reynolds and his operation. He doesn't give up easily on valuable breeding stock, which is exactly how he would view Luna." "We need to move them," Sarah said immediately. "Somewhere Reynolds won't think to look." "The Wildlife Center has security, but it's also the first place he'd check," Dr. Abernathy pointed out. "And our protocols would require separating Luna from the domestic cat." "That's not an option," Sarah said firmly, watching as Oscar continued to groom Scout while keeping a protective eye on Luna and the female kittens. Breaking their bond now could be traumatic for all of them. Mike cleared his throat. "My cabin, up in the National Forest land. It's remote, secure, and Reynolds doesn't know about my connection to Sarah." Dr. Abernathy considered the suggestion. "Not ideal from a facility's perspective, but perhaps the best immediate solution for safety. I could authorize it as a temporary emergency placement under my supervision." "Then it's settled," Sarah said, already mentally cataloging what they would need to transport Luna and her kittens safely. "How soon can we move them?" "The sooner the better," Mike replied, "before Reynolds realizes we've spotted him." The next 2 hours passed in controlled chaos as they prepared for the relocation. May returned to the Wildlife Center to gather specialized transport crates and medical supplies while Mike readied his cabin remotely through calls to a trusted neighbor. Dr. Abernathy used her authority to create emergency documentation that would legitimize their actions if questioned. Sarah focused on preparing Luna and her family for transport, a task complicated by the bobcat's growing restlessness. Whether sensing the human's anxiety or picking up on some other cue, Luna had become increasingly alert, frequently moving her kittens from one location to another within the bedroom. "She knows something's wrong," Sarah told Dr. Abernathy as they observed the bobcat's behavior. "I'm worried about how she'll react to being crated for transport." "Sedation would be safest," Dr. Abernathy suggested, "but it carries risks so soon after her injury," and with nursing kittens. Sarah knelt near the current nest Luna had created under the bed, speaking softly to the bobcat. "We're trying to protect you, Luna. I need you to trust me one more time." As if understanding, Luna's eyes met Sarah's, that same intelligent awareness that had struck her from their first encounter. After a long moment, the bobcat slowly blinked, that familiar sign of trust. Oscar approached, positioning himself beside Sarah as though offering his endorsement of the plan. His presence seemed to reassure Luna, who allowed Sarah to gently check each kitten in preparation for the journey. When May returned with the specialized transport equipment, they faced the moment of truth. The plan was to move Luna and her kittens in one large transport crate, with Oscar in a separate, smaller carrier positioned where Luna could see and smell him. "Ready?" Sarah asked, holding the large transport crate open, while May prepared to help guide Luna inside. To everyone's surprise, Oscar took the initiative. The tuxedo cat calmly walked into the large crate, circled once, then sat facing outward, clearly expecting Luna to follow. It was such a deliberate action that even Dr. Abernathy gasped softly. "I've never seen anything like it," the veteran veterinarian murmured. "He's showing her it's safe." Luna hesitated only briefly before gathering Scout in her mouth and carrying him into the crate, settling him beside Oscar. She returned for each of her remaining kittens, methodically relocating her family into the transport container without human handling. "Remarkable," Dr. Abernathy whispered. "Simply remarkable." With Luna and her family secured, they quickly loaded the crate into Mike's truck, cushioned with blankets to minimize jostling. Sarah would travel with them, while May and Dr. Abernathy would follow in separate vehicles to avoid drawing attention. As they prepared to depart, Deputy Jenkins called with unsettling news. "Reynolds is on the move. He's headed toward your property, Sarah." "We're leaving now," Mike replied tersely, ending the call and starting the engine. "Hold on tight. We might need to take the back roads." As they pulled away from the house, Sarah glanced back at the property that had become an unexpected sanctuary for this strange blended family. In the transport crate beside her, Luna lay curled around her kittens, with Oscar maintaining his protective position between them and the crate's door. "Don't worry," Sarah assured them softly, placing her hand against the carrier. "We won't let him find you." What she didn't say, couldn't say, was how deeply their safety had become entwined with her own sense of purpose. Somewhere along this extraordinary journey, protecting Luna and her family had become more than professional obligation or even compassionate intervention. It had become a promise she would do anything to keep. The journey to Mike's cabin wound through increasingly remote terrain, the paved roads giving way to gravel and finally to a narrow dirt track that climbed steadily into the forested foothills. Sarah kept one hand on the transport crate, offering reassurance through the occasional bumps and turns. Luna remained remarkably calm throughout, her trust apparently extending to this strange, moving environment as long as Oscar maintained his steadfast presence. "We're taking the long way around," Mike explained as he navigated a particularly rough stretch. "Less chance of being followed." Sarah nodded, dividing her attention between the cats and the side mirror, watching for any sign of pursuit. Deputy Jenkins had called once more to confirm that Reynolds had arrived at her empty house, where an officer posing as a meter reader was keeping discreet surveillance. "He's smart enough not to break in with someone watching," Jenkins had reported, "but he's definitely looking for something specific." The cabin appeared suddenly around a sharp bend, a sturdy log structure nestled against a backdrop of pines, with a small clearing that offered views of the valley below, while maintaining privacy from all sides. It was more spacious than Sarah had expected, with a wide covered porch and generous windows. "Family place," Mike explained as he parked behind the structure, concealing the vehicle from the access road. "My grandfather built it. I modernized it. Solar power, satellite internet, rainwater collection system, off-grid but comfortable. Dr. Abernathy arrived minutes later, followed by May in a separate vehicle. They quickly established a secure space for Luna and her kittens in what had once been a study, now cleared of furniture, except for a low platform bed where the transport crate was placed. The windows were covered with removable panels that allowed airflow while preventing Luna from seeing outside, a precaution against stress in the new environment. "We should let them acclimate gradually," Dr. Abernathy advised as they completed the setup. "Luna needs to recognize this as a safe den before we open the crate." Oscar, however, had different ideas. As soon as they placed the transport container on the platform, the tuxedo cat began working at the latch with surprising dexterity, his paws manipulating the mechanism until it released. "Well, I'll be damned," Mike murmured as they watched Oscar deliberately push open the crate door, then look back at Luna as if to say, "I've checked, it's safe." Luna hesitated only briefly before emerging, carrying Scout as she had during the loading process. She surveyed the room with cautious attention, her amber eyes taking in every detail before returning to the crate for her daughters. Once all the kittens were settled in the corner she'd selected as most defensible, she conducted a thorough inspection of the entire space, Oscar trailing behind like a consultant confirming her assessments. "Their communication is unbelievable," May whispered, capturing video on her phone. The wildlife behavior journals would never believe this without evidence. Dr. Abernathy, who had maintained professional detachment throughout most of the process, finally allowed her scientific curiosity to show. "In 43 years of wildlife medicine, I've never observed anything comparable. Their relationship completely contradicts conventional understanding of interspecies dynamics." Sarah watched as Luna completed her inspection and returned to her kittens, settling beside them with what appeared to be approval of the new surroundings. Oscar took up position near the room's entrance, his posture suggesting he was standing guard. "What do you think it means?" Sarah asked softly. "Their connection?" Dr. Abernathy considered the question with the careful deliberation of a scientist facing an anomaly. "I think it means our understanding of animal cognition and social bonding is far more limited than we care to admit. These two have created something extraordinary." While Luna and her family settled in, the humans gathered in the cabin's main room to discuss next steps. Deputy Jenkins joined them via speakerphone, updating them on the situation at Sarah's house. Reynolds stayed for about 40 minutes, mostly watching from his vehicle. When he left, he didn't look happy. The deputy's voice crackled through the connection. "We're tracking his movements, but discreetly. Don't want to tip him off that we're onto him." "What's his endgame here?" Sarah asked, the question that had been troubling her since discovering Reynolds's surveillance. "Why risk returning to criminal activity so soon after prison?" "Money," Dr. Abernathy said flatly. "Exotic animal trafficking is extraordinarily lucrative. A breeding female bobcat with unusual socialization traits could be worth tens of thousands to the right buyer. Add in kittens with potentially inherited social characteristics." The implication hung heavily in the room. Luna and her family weren't just wildlife to Reynolds, they were valuable commodities. "We need to build a case against him," Mike suggested. "Use Luna as evidence of his previous operation and catch him in the act of attempting to reclaim her." Dr. Abernathy shook her head. "Too risky. Reynolds has connections in the exotic pet underground. If word gets out about Luna's unusual traits, it could put a target on her back from multiple directions." "Then what do we do?" May asked. "We can't keep them hidden in this cabin forever." A silence fell over the group as they confronted the complexity of the situation. It was Sarah who finally spoke, her voice quiet but determined. "We need to give them a legitimate, permanent placement that keeps them together, including Oscar, while protecting them from people like Reynolds." She looked at Dr. Abernathy. "Is there any precedent for something like that?" The senior veterinarian frowned thoughtfully. Not precisely, but I might have an idea worth exploring. Before she could elaborate, they were interrupted by a sound from the study, the distinctive mewling of bobcat kittens, but more energetic than usual. Sarah hurried to investigate, the others following close behind. The scene that greeted them was both charming and revelatory. Luna had apparently decided it was time for her kitten's first hunting lesson. She had arranged them in a semicircle and placed before them a small feather toy, one of the items they'd brought from Sarah's house for Oscar. The bobcat was demonstrating pouncing technique, exaggerating the movements as she batted the feather, then looking expectantly at her offspring. Scout was the first to attempt imitation, his tiny body coiling and springing forward with surprising coordination for his age. His sisters watched with varying degrees of interest, one attempting to copy him, while the others seemed content to observe. Most remarkable was Oscar's role. The domestic cat sat slightly to one side, occasionally demonstrating an alternative technique, the sideways pounce familiar to anyone who's watched a house cat hunt. Luna appeared to approve of these additions, sometimes incorporating elements of Oscar's movements into her own demonstrations. "They're co-teaching," Dr. Abernathy whispered, her scientific detachment momentarily overcome by wonder. A wild and domestic cat, collaboratively teaching hunting skills. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she watched this extraordinary education unfold. It wasn't just Luna's unusual comfort with humans that made her special. It was her capacity to bridge worlds, to form connections that transcended the usual boundaries between wild and domestic. That evening, as Luna and her family settled in for the night and the others prepared sleeping arrangements throughout the cabin, Sarah stepped onto the porch for a moment of reflection. The forest around them was alive with night sounds, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Mike joined her, offering a steaming mug of tea. "Penny for your thoughts?" Sarah accepted the mug gratefully. "I was just thinking about belonging, about where Luna and her kittens really belong in this world." "Not a simple question," Mike acknowledged. "No," Sarah agreed. "They're not fully wild, not after Luna's captive upbringing and this unusual socialization with Oscar. But they're not domestic either. Maybe they belong in the in-between," Mike suggested. "Like this cabin, connected to the wilderness, but also to the human world." Sarah considered this, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Dr. Abernathy mentioned an idea earlier. I wonder what she has in mind. Before Mike could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. His expression darkened as he read it. "Deputy Jenkins says Reynolds has been making calls to known associates from his trafficking days. They've intercepted some concerning conversations." "What kind of conversations?" Sarah asked, tension returning to her shoulders. "He knows Luna is valuable and he's determined to find her." Mike looked up from the phone, his face grave in the porch light. "And he's mentioned your name specifically, Sarah. He somehow knows you're connected to her." The night suddenly felt colder as Sarah realized that their sanctuary might not remain secret for long. Somewhere out there, a man who saw Luna and her kittens only as valuable property was actively searching for them, and for her. Inside, unaware of the growing threat, Oscar maintained his vigilant watch as Luna and her kittens slept peacefully in their temporary haven. Dawn broke over the cabin with a golden clarity that belied the tension of the previous night. Sarah had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with shadowy figures searching through forests, while Luna and her family rested peacefully under Oscar's watchful gaze. As the first light filtered through the window coverings, Sarah checked on her unusual charges, finding Scout already awake and engaged in what appeared to be a game of pounce and retreat with Oscar, while Luna nursed her daughters. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah whispered, receiving a slow blink from Luna and a chirping greeting from Oscar in response. Scout paused his play to study Sarah with the intense curiosity that had become his trademark, his tiny spotted body perfectly balanced as he cocked his head to one side. In the cabin's kitchen, Dr. Abernathy was already awake, her silver hair pulled back as she worked on her laptop. Multiple scientific journals and wildlife rehabilitation manuals were spread across the table, suggesting she'd been researching for hours. "I couldn't sleep," she explained as Sarah joined her. "Too many possibilities running through my mind. About Luna and the kittens. About what they represent," Dr. Abernathy corrected, turning the laptop to show Sarah a document she'd been drafting. "I've been developing a proposal for what I believe might be the first of its kind, a specialized research and education facility focused on the intersection of wild and domestic species." Sarah scanned the document, her excitement growing as she understood the implications. "You want to create a permanent home for Luna and her family that's also a research center?" "Precisely." Dr. Abernathy's eyes lit with rare enthusiasm. "What we're witnessing between Luna and Oscar isn't just an anomaly. It's an opportunity to study interspecies bonding and communication at a level never before documented. Their relationship could provide insights applicable to wildlife rehabilitation, conservation psychology, even domestic cat behavior." "And Oscar would stay with them?" This was Sarah's primary concern. "He would be integral to the program. Their bond is the cornerstone of what makes this scientifically significant." Dr. Abernathy tapped the laptop screen. "I've already reached out to several colleagues at research universities and conservation organizations. The response has been overwhelming. Everyone wants to be part of studying this unique family." "What about funding? Facilities?" Sarah asked, her practical mind already considering logistics. "That's where this gets interesting." Dr. Abernathy allowed herself a small smile. When word spread about a potential new research initiative, several major donors expressed interest. One in particular, the Harrington Wildlife Trust, has offered a substantial grant, and more importantly, a property. She pulled up satellite images of a secluded acreage about 50 miles north of the city. 200 acres of mixed woodland and meadow, already zoned for wildlife research. There's an existing structure that could be modified to create secure natural enclosures and observation facilities. "It sounds perfect," Sarah breathed, hardly daring to hope that such an elegant solution might be possible. "It's not without challenges," Dr. Abernathy cautioned. "The regulatory hurdles alone will be significant. We'll need special permits for keeping a bobcat in a research setting, exemptions for the unusual socialization aspects. But it's possible. With my reputation and the scientific significance of this case, yes, I believe it's possible." Their discussion was interrupted by Mike entering the kitchen, his expression grave as he checked his phone. "Reynolds is expanding his search. Jenkins says he's been asking questions around town, showing pictures of a bobcat to anyone who'll talk to him." "What pictures?" Sarah asked, alarmed. "He couldn't have photographed Luna at my house." "Stock photos, presumably, but he's describing a female bobcat with distinctive socialization traits." Mike pocketed his phone. "He's being careful not to explicitly admit he's looking for an illegally trafficked animal, but the implication is clear to anyone who knows his history." Dr. Abernathy's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we need to accelerate our timeline. I'll finalize the proposal today and submit emergency applications for the necessary permits. The sooner we establish legal protection for Luna and her kittens as research subjects, the harder it will be for Reynolds to touch them." As they discussed next steps, May joined them, yawning but immediately focused on the developing plan. "I've been compiling all our video documentation of Luna and Oscar's interactions," she reported. "The footage is extraordinary, definitely strong enough to support the scientific merit arguments." By mid-morning, The cabin had transformed into a makeshift research headquarters. Dr. Abernathy coordinated with colleagues and regulatory officials via satellite internet. May worked on cataloging and organizing visual evidence, and Mike maintained communication with Deputy Jenkins about Reynolds's movements. Sarah divided her time between assisting with the proposal and caring for Luna's family, whose routines continued with remarkable normalcy despite the circumstances. The kittens were growing visibly stronger each day, their movements more coordinated, their personalities more distinct. Scout remained the adventurer, constantly pushing boundaries, while his sisters showed varying degrees of boldness and caution. Most fascinating was how Oscar had expanded his role beyond protector to become a genuine co-parent, demonstrating skills and behaviors that the kittens would need as they matured. He showed them how to groom efficiently, how to sharpen claws on appropriate surfaces, even how to bury waste, basic cat behaviors that transcended the wild domestic divide. "He's teaching them how to be cats," Sarah observed to Dr. Abernathy as they watched Oscar demonstrate a particularly effective pouncing technique that Scout immediately attempted to copy. Not wild cats or house cats, just cats. "The fundamental Felidae behaviors," Dr. Abernathy agreed, "the instinctive core that both species share, despite thousands of years of divergent evolution." She shook her head in wonder. "And Luna allows it, encourages it even. She recognizes the value in what he's showing them." The relative peace of their research bubble was shattered mid-afternoon when Mike received an urgent call from Deputy Jenkins. "Reynolds was spotted in Clayton Township this morning," Mike reported grimly after hanging up, naming a small community less than 15 miles from the cabin. "He's getting closer, asking about remote properties, cabins for rent." "How could he have tracked us this far?" May asked, worry creasing her brow. "He must have followed the Wildlife Center's vehicles," Dr. Abernathy realized. "If he was watching Sarah's house, he would have seen official trucks arriving. From there, it wouldn't be hard to follow the trail to the center, and if he has contacts..." She didn't need to finish the thought. Sarah felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. "We need to move again." "No," Dr. Abernathy said firmly. "Moving again would only stress Luna and the kittens, and there's no guarantee any new location would remain secret longer than this one." She turned her laptop to show them a document with an official letterhead. "I've just received preliminary approval for our research proposal. By tomorrow, we should have emergency permits that legally establish Luna and her kittens as protected research subjects." "Will that be enough to stop Reynolds?" Sarah asked. "It changes the game entirely," Dr. Abernathy explained. "Once they're legally designated research animals, any attempt to take them becomes a federal offense with mandatory prison time. Reynolds may be desperate, but he's not stupid." The strategy made sense, but Sarah couldn't shake her unease. "What about tonight? The permits won't be finalized until tomorrow at the earliest." Mike stood up, his ranger's instincts evident in his purposeful stance. "I'll contact some friends, former colleagues from my ranger days. We can set up a security perimeter around the cabin, keep watch through the night." As the others coordinated the immediate security response, Sarah returned to check on Luna and her family. The Bobcat was alert, her ears swiveling toward the sounds of increased activity in the main cabin. Oscar sat beside her, his posture mirroring her vigilance. "We're going to keep you safe," Sarah promised them softly. "All of you." Luna's amber eyes met hers with that uncanny intelligence that still took Sarah's breath away. Then, in a gesture that seemed deliberate in its meaning, the Bobcat gently nudged Scout toward Sarah. The kitten wobbled forward, his tiny spotted form a perfect miniature of his mother, but with a fearlessness that was uniquely his own. As Scout approached, Oscar watched attentively but made no move to intervene. This was Luna's decision, a demonstration of trust that transcended their species' differences. Sarah carefully extended her hand, allowing the kitten to investigate her scent. After a thorough examination, Scout did something extraordinary. He pressed his small head against her fingers in the unmistakable gesture of a cat soliciting affection. "Oh," Sarah whispered, tears springing to her eyes at the profound significance of the moment. Luna was sharing her kitten with her, acknowledging Sarah as part of their unusual family circle. As darkness fell over the cabin, the makeshift security team took their positions around the property. Inside, Sarah settled onto a small cot in the study, determined to stay with Luna and her family through the night. Oscar joined her, dividing his attention between his vigil near the door and occasional checks on the Bobcat family. Outside, the forest held its breath as shadows moved through the trees. Whether friend or foe, the night had yet to reveal. Midnight cast the forest in silver-blue shadows as clouds parted to reveal a nearly full moon. Inside the cabin study, Sarah dozed fitfully on her cot, one hand resting near the nest where Luna and her kittens slept. Oscar remained vigilant, his green eyes reflecting the dim safety light as he maintained his position by the door. A soft crackle from the radio on the nightstand pulled Sarah from her shallow sleep. Mike's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "Movement at the perimeter, southwest corner. Stay inside, doors locked." Sarah sat up, instantly alert. Luna was already awake, her ears swiveling toward the sound of distant footsteps that human ears couldn't detect. The Bobcat gathered Scout close, her body tense, but not panicked. Through the window's edge, Sarah caught glimpses of flashlights moving through the trees, multiple beams approaching from different directions. Mike and his ranger friends had established a security perimeter, but someone had breached it. The radio crackled again. "Sarah, it's Jenkins. Reynolds is here with 2 others. We're tracking them, but they've split up. Stay put." Oscar suddenly moved from his post, back arched, tail puffed, staring intently at the study's window. A shadow passed across the glass, someone moving stealthily along the cabin's exterior wall. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she silently gathered Luna's kittens, moving them deeper into the room's shadows. Luna followed, her movements silent and fluid despite her maternal bulk. Together they created a protective formation around the vulnerable young. A scratching sound came from the window latch, someone trying to force it open. Oscar emitted a low growl, positioning himself between the window and the others. The radio suddenly erupted with activity, shouts, commands, the sound of people running through underbrush. The shadow at the window disappeared, footsteps receding rapidly. "We've got 2 of them," Jenkins's voice reported through the static. "Reynolds is still..." The transmission cut off as a crash came from the cabin's main room, the sound of breaking glass followed by heavy footsteps. "I know you're here, Chen," a man's voice called out, rough and determined. "You have something that belongs to me." Sarah froze, her breath caught in her throat. Reynolds had found them. Oscar's reaction was immediate and unexpected. The tuxedo cat darted to the study door, slipping through the narrow opening before Sarah could stop him. "Oscar, no," she whispered desperately. In the main room, Reynolds cursed as something crashed to the floor. "Damn cat," he snarled. "Where's the Bobcat? Where's Luna?" The name confirmation hit Sarah like a physical blow. He knew Luna specifically, not just any Bobcat, but her. More commotion followed, the sound of Oscar apparently creating chaos in the main room, knocking items over, distracting Reynolds from his search. The domestic cat was deliberately drawing attention away from the study. Sarah made a split-second decision. Moving silently to the door, she eased it shut, then locked it from the inside. If Reynolds got past Oscar, he'd still have to break down the door to reach Luna and her kittens. Luna watched Sarah's actions with intense focus, then did something remarkable. She gathered her kittens one by one, carrying them into the small attached bathroom, the most defensible space within the study. Once they were secured, she returned to Sarah's side, positioning herself facing the door, a wild predator prepared to defend not just her offspring, but her human protector as well. The radio crackled back to life. "Sarah, we're approaching the cabin. Hold tight." Outside the study, Oscar's diversionary tactics had apparently worked too well. Reynolds's frustrated shout suggested he was now pursuing the domestic cat through the cabin, overturning furniture in his attempt to capture the elusive feline. "Come back here, you little..." His words cut off in a startled yell, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone falling heavily. The cabin's front door burst open, multiple footsteps rushing in. "Police! Freeze!" What followed was a blur of shouted commands, the click of handcuffs, and Reynolds's angry protests. When Mike finally knocked on the study door, his voice tense but triumphant, Sarah nearly collapsed with relief. "It's over," he told her as she unlocked the door. "We got him. Oscar's fine." The crazy cat led Reynolds on a chase that ended with him tripping over an ottoman. Oscar appeared in the doorway, seeming entirely pleased with himself as he trotted back to Luna's side. The domestic cat showed no signs of injury, just ruffled fur and the unmistakable swagger of victory. "He created a diversion," Sarah said, still processing what had happened. "He protected them." Jenkins appeared behind Mike, his expression a mix of professional satisfaction and amazement as he caught sight of Luna standing protectively beside Sarah. "That's one brave house cat you've got there, and one extraordinary bobcat." By dawn, the chaos had settled. Reynolds and his accomplices were in custody, facing multiple charges including attempted theft of research animals, breaking and entering, and violation of parole. The emergency permits for Luna's research status had been expedited following the incident, legally cementing her protection. As Sarah sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunrise, Oscar curled contentedly in her lap, and Luna visible through the window with her kittens, Dr. Abernathy joined her with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "It's official," the senior veterinarian announced, handing Sarah one of the mugs. "The Harrington Wildlife Trust has fast-tracked the research facility funding. Construction begins next month." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. "So they'll have a permanent home." "They'll have more than that," Dr. Abernathy corrected, unusual warmth in her voice. "They'll have purpose. Their story will help us understand interspecies relationships in ways we never have before, and we want you to lead the research team." Sarah looked up in surprise. "Me? Who better? You've been documenting their relationship from the beginning. You understand them in ways none of us could." Dr. Abernathy smiled. "Besides, I think they've chosen you as much as you've chosen them." 6 months later, the Harrington Interspecies Research Center sprawled across its 200 acres of protected land, its facilities designed to blend harmoniously with the natural environment. At its heart stood the main research building, with one wing specifically constructed to house its most famous residents. Sarah paused in her note-taking to watch Luna and her now half-grown kittens explore their spacious enclosure. The specialized habitat featured both indoor and outdoor spaces, with climbing structures, natural vegetation, and observation areas designed to be minimally intrusive. Scout, now a lanky adolescent bobcat with his mother's intelligent eyes, was leading his sisters in a hunting exercise, stalking a remote-controlled prey simulator that helped develop their natural skills. Luna supervised from a raised platform, her sleek body fully recovered from the injury that had first brought her to Sarah's door. And Oscar, special permission had been granted for the domestic cat to remain as part of the research family, lounged nearby, occasionally demonstrating a particular technique when the youngsters struggled. He wore a specialized collar that allowed him access to certain areas while preventing the bobcats from wandering into spaces designed for human researchers. "They're progressing beautifully," May observed, joining Sarah at the observation window. Now a full-time staff member at the center, she coordinated the educational programs that brought carefully screened visitors to learn about the unique family. Scout showed interest in the enrichment puzzles this morning, Sarah noted. His problem-solving skills are advancing faster than we anticipated. Dr. Abernathy's research proposal had blossomed into something far more significant than anyone had initially imagined. The unusual bond between a domestic cat and a family of bobcats had captured scientific interest worldwide, attracting researchers from multiple disciplines and generating new understanding of feline cognition, social learning, and interspecies communication. As Sarah completed her observations, Oscar suddenly appeared at the special cat door installed between the observation area and the enclosure. The tuxedo cat chirped a greeting, rubbing against her legs before leading her toward the viewing platform where Luna rested. This had become their routine, Oscar serving as intermediary, maintaining connections between the human and wild sides of their unusual family. The bond that had formed during those intense weeks of crisis had not diminished, but rather evolved into something sustainable, a balance between wild instinct and learned trust. Luna acknowledged Sarah's arrival with that slow blink that had come to mean so much, then returned her attention to her offspring. The bobcat had adapted perfectly to her new environment, neither fully wild nor truly tame, but something uniquely her own. Mike, now a regular consultant for the center's security and habitat design, often described Luna and her family as bridge dwellers, creatures who existed in the space between worlds, teaching humans about the remarkable adaptability and intelligence of animals when given the chance to express it. Reynolds had received a 15-year sentence for his crimes, his trafficking network dismantled by investigations that stemmed from his arrest. The legal precedents established by Luna's case had strengthened protections for wildlife against exploitation, creating ripple effects far beyond one bobcat family. As evening approached, Sarah completed her notes and prepared to leave the observation area. Before going, she paused to watch Oscar groom Scout's ears, the young bobcat submitting to the attention with the same patience his mother had always shown. The 3 female kittens played nearby, their movements echoing both their wild heritage and the domestic influences that had shaped their development. Luna, watching it all from her perch, caught Sarah's gaze one final time. In that moment of connection across species boundaries, Sarah felt the same wonder she had experienced on that stormy night when a desperate bobcat had appeared on her porch and a house cat had done the unthinkable. Some might call what had developed between them unnatural, a wild predator forming bonds with both a domestic cat and a human. But Sarah had come to see it differently. What Luna and Oscar had created wasn't an aberration, but a reminder of possibilities that existed when artificial boundaries fell away. Their story had begun with an injured bobcat seeking help in a storm. It had grown into something that challenged scientific understanding and touched countless lives, and it continued to unfold day by day in a place where wild and domestic, human and animal, found unexpected harmony. As Sarah switched off the observation room lights, she smiled at the soft sounds of the cats settling in for the evening, a family unlike any other, but a family nonetheless.